right, well, it's do or die time, Reggie. I mean, Minnesota
Mm-hmm.
Wild in desperate need of that gut check game tonight in St. Louis. They face elimination in Game 6. Before we get into maybe some specifics about tonight, let's just take a little step back and look at the Wild season on a broader scale. Playoffs were always the first goal at the beginning of the season. They checked that
Mm-hmm.
off. But now, I mean, there's no doubt fans they'd be at a loss. They'd be frustrated for sure with another round one exit if that's the case. So with their back against the wall tonight, should they lose this game or even the series, how should people view this team's season? Will it be considered a failure of a season, especially when you make an aggressive move to go out and get Marc-Andre Fleury for the playoffs specifically? I think that sent a loud and clear message. We're all in. We're trying to make a serious push for the Stanley Cup, only to get knocked out in round one once again.
Yeah, I mean, they said as much when Billy Guerin took that big swing on Flower. He said it like, "Look, we're excited. This has big implications for us. We're going for it." And it's just tough too because he has not been the best in some of these games in this series, and that part kind of stings a bit because it's like, dang, you did this big move to get him, and then all of a sudden you get him, you put him in this situation that you got him for, and it's not necessarily working out how you thought. That being said, them matching up against the Blues was a very, very tough opening round matchup. And, I guess if you want to compete for a Stanley Cup, win a Stanley Cup, you got to go through some good teams. And so if you play a little bit of devil's advocate there, it's just like, well, that's a team that if they have these championship expectations, they're supposed to beat. But again, it sucks that it's the Blues because they've had their troubles with the Blues before. And now you talk about yet another series where they don't make it out of the first round. And that's a tough pill to swallow, especially considering the cap ramifications that you're going to have next year where you may not be able to keep this particular team intact. But it's also interesting because, I mentioned last night on the newscast on KARE 11, Dean Evason basically said after last game that they were Kirill and the Pips. Like they were Kirill and the Temptations. You know what I mean? Like they were Justin Timberlake and NSYNC. Like it's like he was the leading guy, leading singer, and everybody else was playing backup, where he really needed someone else to sing the lead from time to time. And that part is very frustrating because they haven't had problems scoring goals this season. They haven't had problems, going up and when you see a deficit like a 4-2 or 5-2, they haven't had problems going back and snagging it back, tying the game up, sending it to overtime. And you haven't seen that in this postseason. And that's tough because you're just like, well, I mean, the only thing that changed is that, it's the playoffs. I mean, you should be even more motivated to go and snatch some of these victories from the jaws of defeat. Like that should happen. But I think the problem is they've gotten a little tight. They've gotten a little tense. Maybe these goals. You've seen them have some errant goals or shots on goals where you're just like, dang, man. Like in the regular season, they were making that 2-3 times a game. Like, what's going on? And it's a tough pill to swallow. And a lot of people will say, well, this is just Minnesota sports. And it's just like, dang, man, like you hate to always have to come back to that particular note. But I do think that if they go down tonight, which I hope not to see it, I want to see them come back here and do game 7. But if they do go out, we've seen it 79% of the time, the team that wins game 5 goes on to win the series. But if they do go out, I do think that it's a bit of a disappointment for them considering all the moves that they pulled to contend for a Stanley Cup.
You brought up the salary cap. I'm glad you did. If they do, in fact, lose, I'm wondering what you think are the big ripple effects as you start to look at their offseason and the moves they need to take this team to the next step in being a legitimate championship caliber team, not just that playoff caliber team. I know finding a way to keep Fiala is going to be probably the A topic right out the gate. Is there an obvious move or two outside of just retaining guys, though, you think needs to happen?
Well, I guess it just depends on, what type of team they want to be. I think,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably going to be a bit of a youth movement next season. Maybe call up some of the guys to compete at this level because, not going to be able to afford everyone. You're talking about, do you keep Matt Dumba or do you keep Fiala? And then you're like, well, shoot. Bill Guerin is just like, you're only as good as your last game.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, dang, what is he saying? And, you know what you're going to get from a guy like Matt Dumba. And it's tough to say, as good as Fiala was to end the regular season, it seems like you know what you're going to get from him, too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, do you commit long-term to a guy like that hasn't played very well in the postseason? Because if you're going to do that, then it's just like, well, like, maybe you just cut bait and try to see what you can do on the flip side. And, next year's team is not going to be as good as this year's team. So you want to see this year's team overcome the Blues, take it to Game 7, back here in the Twin Cities and win it to get to the next round. And then you got to play Colorado, goodness gracious. But then, you don't want to think about next year. Like, I'm really trying not to talk about next year because the team could look so radically different. And you talk about moves, maybe trades being made, unloading some of these pieces on the team that are key players this year that maybe you can't afford to keep for next year. And so it's hard to get into all of that right now because there is still a game to be played and they are not out of it yet. But there are going to be some decisions to be made, and this team is not going to be the same. And so you hope to see them maximize this team. And I don't really know what to expect tonight.
I think the biggest head scratcher and the biggest pill to swallow, if they do end up losing this series for a lot of fans, will be the play of Kevin Fiala, just because it's just Jekyll and Hyde. He was so good those last 2 or 3 weeks heading into the playoffs. And to see him disappear, 0 goals through 5 games, 1 assist, that's it. I think that line, the Fiala line, has only scored 1 goal in these 5 games as well. So it's just really, again, a tough pill to swallow just to not have any help around Kaprizov. That's going to be another one big topic for sure going into the offseason. Who and how can we get help around Kaprizov? Because like we've seen, the guy just can't do it all himself all the time, 24/7. Last one, I got some sort of problem, man, because I can't not talk about this goalie situation every time we bring up the Wild. Is it time to give Cam Talbot a shot tonight? I mean, the guy was red hot coming in. I saw a tweet yesterday, Cam Talbot hasn't lost a game in 70 days. Okay, take that how you will. But is there any chance we see him? Or you think their mind's just already made up and they're committing with Flowers? Give me maybe a percentage chance tonight we see Cam.
Ooh, I'm not good at these type of things. I'll just say I would probably put Cam Talbot in net.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at what the Blues did a couple games ago, putting Bennington in, it worked out well for them. I think, bringing Talbot off the bench cold, it's going to be cold anyway, bringing him off the bench cold, I think, what else do you have to lose at this point? You've seen what you could get from Flower, and maybe you just switch it up. Maybe seeing a different presence in net just kind of creates some urgency in the other guys. And so I say all that to say I would go with Talbot, but I think Evason probably sticks with Flower.
Most people are kind of just nudging for Talbot, but I think they end up going for Flowers because of, again, they just made that decision when they traded for him for the playoffs, and they're committing to that. But here's how I would look at it. I would say, okay, if we lose this game, who am I going to feel better about sleeping at night knowing I started? I think I would have a little bit more regret going through this entire first round of the playoffs, losing the way you do, and not giving Cam Talbot at least one shot. If I start Cam Talbot and they lose, at least I can go to bed at night saying, well, it wasn't either one. It wasn't one guy. They both had a crack at it. And at least now we know. Otherwise, you go into the offseason saying, what if, what if, what if? And you just don't like to play that game for sure. Too many what ifs. Wild must travel to St. Louis, as you know. They got to steal one tonight. Then, if they can do that, they come back to XL Energy Center on Saturday for Game 7. Boy, oh boy, wouldn't that be fun? Can you imagine Game 7 back here at home? Puck drop tonight, 8:30 p.m. Central Standard on TNT. Rest assured, Reggie and I will be here tomorrow to break it all down.